So, in total, 4 people have died in Tembisa during these demonstrations over the past 2 days. And the families of 2 of them are blaming law enforcement. One family says a man was shot and killed simply because he was standing in the yard, recording that violence with his cell phone that you've just heard. Another says their loved one was running away and was shot in the back when police opened fire. Now, according to the Independent Police Investigative Directorate, police in Nyala did fire rubber bullets at those who had barricaded the road with rocks and burning tyres, but it says that live ammunition is also reported to have been used. Let's discuss with policing expert Eldred de Klerk. Thank you for being with us. If it is true that live ammunition was used, would that in itself be a problem here?
Yes, indeed, Francis, and thank you for the opportunity to speak about this, because the constitutional imperative for the police is to protect life. And the police has a duty of care, and any kind of force is used under instruction. So we have to look at the instruction that was given to these officers by their commanding officers as part of the operational objective to deal with the public protest in Tembisa. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that it is against international convention to use shotguns to disperse a crowd. Police use force, and the force can only be used and should only be used to defend life. So was there any dire threat to life? Because the outdated notion of protecting property is in fact an outdated notion, because property can be rebuilt and it can be replaced, but the life cannot be replaced. But so yes, we do have a problem when police use any kind of force without there being a direct threat to life.
So you rightly say, I mean, there has to be an investigation. What instructions were given? There need to be autopsies on the people who died. But it sounds like you might agree with this statement from the EFF. It says the trigger-happy police have shown incompetence and a failure to control a volatile situation by resorting to killing people instead of managing the situation.
Well, yes, you do. And police conventionally have to take control of a situation. That is, allow people to give expression to their right to protest, set up lines of communication with them, and have direct conversation with them, which is the first step. The first step should never be firing at fellow South Africans unless there's a dire threat to life. That's the first convention. Communicate, negotiate, and then try to facilitate the right to protest. The unfortunate thing is that the police are the only ones on the scene. So what happened overnight in Tembisa is a question the police have to answer, because police can and should be mobilizing community leadership. They should be mobilizing councillors and the mayor and every other person in a position to respond to the needs of the community should have been on the scene, present throughout the night if necessary, to try to ensure that Tembisa comes to some relative calm. But it's not just the relative calm and stability, it's what happens with the complaints of the folks in Tembisa after some level of normality is restored. Because what we're sitting with is a social conflict. The issues are structural, it's institutional, it's systemic, and when it comes to police action, it's also cultural. And it's also the way we give vent to our dissent and dissatisfaction with the government is through public protest. That norm has to change. And that means that we have to have conversations with communities, build relationships in which we engender trust and some hope to the future. That is the duty of care and protection and prevention that we should all be pursuing.
Yeah, and destroying property is a huge problem here. But focusing on the police, if we just look at that side, I mean, surely we should be doing so much better, since South Africa has a history here. After the Marikana massacre, there was the Farnham Commission report. It spoke about leadership problems and a lack of training. Police then said that they had submitted to the Commission an enhanced Standing Order 262, dealing with public order policing, and there would be training efforts across the board. But I mean, has that translated to any sort of better response on the ground?
Not necessarily, and I'm aware of all the interventions by the various national commissioners and the ministers we've had since Marikana. That is all good and well. Training is an ongoing thing, and it needs to be scenario based. And otherwise, unless it becomes the norm and it becomes part of the habit of how we police, we fall back into default, which in this case is bring out the shotguns and let's disperse the crowd, put a distance between us and them, and to ensure that we can claim that we've stabilized the situation. Those short-term kind of operations are never sustainable, and they continue to destroy the trust and regard between police and the citizens who they serve.
Yeah.
So training is an ongoing thing. It cannot be something in the moment. And this is an ongoing conversation we have to have, unfortunately.
Indeed, we do. And the predictions are that this sort of service delivery protest could continue, could intensify. So it must be difficult, I guess, if we are sympathetic. Police respond to a situation, it can then escalate. Then we saw during July 2021, lines of people being allowed to head in with cars to loot shopping malls with no response from police, and there was criticism there. The minister said at the time they knew the situation was volatile, so suggesting that he was trying to protect lives then. Are these decisions very difficult, or are we seemingly swinging between doing too much or doing too little?
It's probably a case of the latter, where we swing between doing too much and too little. And this is what I was talking about, routine and normative policing. And the habit should be the default. Set up communications, cordon off the area, contain where it's happening. Yes, property might be destroyed. Yes, people might vent their anger by throwing bricks at the police, and that's why we should issue them with protective gear. They should take 2 steps backwards rather than take 2 steps forward and shoot. And because policing public disorder is a question of attrition. People will get tired, police will get tired, and they will leave the scene. Folks is not in the habit of continuing to protest throughout the night in a violent way. They have families to care for. They have food to go eat, they have things to go do. Yet, what they've shown is that their anger is such that they're willing to come out repeatedly. And repeatedly, unfortunately, the police meets them with the same response. Not one of communication, not one of seeking to be part of the solution, but one of confrontation. And that must be taxing on the police officers themselves, who also must be suffering some level of trauma, some level of stress, some level of fatigue, and also needs to be cared for after each of these single events. They too have to go home to their families and try to reconcile what they've done on the job with the rest of their lives as fellow citizens. So this is an untenable situation in which no one wins when violence is used to quell what essentially may be disruptive, may even seem the property being destroyed. That does still not justify, in terms of international conventions and norms, of which South Africa is a signatory, the killing of people unless there's a dire and imminent threat to life.
All right, thank you so much for that. Policing expert Eldred de Klerk, and Bongiwe will be a little later on the show in conversation with the aunt of one of those people killed with claims against law enforcement. Of course, there does need to be investigation. IPID is on this. We'll follow all the investigation and what's happening on the ground in Tembisa.